Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about a topic that's inescapable when addressing Codex Oera Linda, and that is the topic of God, or as the Friars called him, Wralda. Looking at the word itself, you'll see that it uses the first variant of the A. If you watched my video on spelling and pronunciation, you'll know what I'm talking about. If not, then you can go back and have a look at that video. The first variant of the A is pronounced A, and according to the way that I interpret the alphabet. So, Wralda. It's described in several places, but in one of the Primal Teachings, Book 1, the very first description of Wralda is the most ancient or primordial, the over-oldest, for he created all things. So the word Wralda can be broken down into the first and second halves, the first Wr and the second Alda. Alda would mean old in this case, and the Ur could mean something like over, so over oldest. If we can also find other meanings in the word, however. For example, you could break the word down into over all da meaning there, so everywhere all at once, and he is also described as everywhere all at once in the book. His primary symbol, it's said that he's everywhere all at once, but we can't see him. So he's referred to also as the spirit of Wralda, Wralda's spirit. And symbols are used to represent Wralda. The primary one is the Yule, which is the wheel of time, for example. But it's never called the wheel of time in the book. So it is alluded to as representing time as well. In chapter 6 of Codex Oera Linda, it says, depicted below are the signs of the Yule, the primary symbol of Wralda, and of the potential or the beginning, from which came time, the bearer, who must conduct the Yule in its circuit forever. So we talked about the Yule yesterday and how the letters were derived from its shape. But the six-spoke wheel represents Wralda as well as the potential, the beginning, which gave birth to time, who is the bearer. It's a bit confusing, this cosmology. It's in different levels and described slightly differently in different places. But we'll concentrate on the wheel for now, if it's the primary symbol of Wralda. So the wheel, as you see here in these pictures, is being carried by who is called the carrier in our translation. The Friars word dena kroder it means the carrier. So he who carries. And it's quite interesting if we look at these images of a statue of what's referred to in Wikipedia, for example, as a Saxon god of time, Crodo. We can see Croder and Crodo are very similar to each other, and since Crodo carries a wheel, I think it's safe to assume that this is what's being alluded to here in Codex Oera Linda. He carries the wheel, he carries water, and he's got his foot on a fish. So there's lots of symbolism going on here. Obviously, this is an Aquarian symbol. The precession of the equinoxes goes from Pisces, which is, some say, represented by the biblical Christ, And here Crodo has his foot on the fish. So the next age in the procession of the equinoxes would be the age of Aquarius. So Crodo apparently represents the new age, the end of the age of Pisces, and the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Obviously, we're getting into the realm of esoterics here, and I don't know enough about it, but we can see from the symbolism that that's obviously the case. The picture in the middle is quite interesting. It is a 17th century etching said to depict Charlemagne, who was the conqueror of the Fraias eventually and the bringer of Christianity to that part of the world. You see in the background that there's a church being constructed, and the etching is called the tearing down of Crodo or something like that. So it's said to depict these Germanic slaves pulling down a statue of Crodo. In this case, the Crodo has a grotesque head, and its hands, which would have been the things carrying the bucket of water and the wheel, have been hewn off. There's no fish under his feet, but his head is kind of reptilian, maybe fish-like. So there's a lot of symbolism going on here as well. Christianity trying to bring back the age of Pisces, or I don't know what's behind it all. But what I also notice is that the one statue carries a 6-spoked wheel like the Fraias, and the picture on the left depicts an 8-spoked wheel, which is similar to the wheel of Dharma, if you're familiar with Buddhism. And we'll be talking about that a little bit later as we go into some other depictions of God in Codex Oera Linda. I'll read a short section here. Wralda, who is holy, good, and eternal, created the potential. From this came time, and time wrought all things, even the very earth herself. Earth bore all grasses, herbs, and trees, all cherished creatures, and all dreaded creatures. All that is good and dear she brought forth by day, and all that is evil and fearsome brought she forth by night. So this kind of sums up the creation story in Codex Oera Linda. So Wralda existed because Wralda is always and everywhere. He is holy, good, and eternal. And the word good in Fraias is the same word as God in Fraias. So this could also have just been translated as Wralda, who is holy, God, and eternal. Or perhaps even, based on the wording, the only God and eternal. Created the potential. From this came time, and time wrought all things. So, as we see here, there's kind of a duality that stems out from Wralda. The Wralda, who's always and everywhere, is a single unity, and the creation then becomes two different things. The potential, which gave birth to time, and then things start to get linear from there. So there's a differentiation in Codex Oera Linda between what's in Fraias called Tanfang and et bien. There's a dual nature to creation downstream of Wralda. He created et Anfang, and et bien is then when time was created from Tanfang. We translated the one as the potential, and it's kind of can be thought of as the primordial chaos, which then in the beginning began to take form. And this is where time comes into the picture, and the world that we know is created, according to Codex Oera Linda. Due to this way of looking at creation, the Fraias people believed in a universe of dimensions, perhaps you could call it. You can see from what we just read before that there's the base, or the all-encompassing unity, which then becomes dual and then gives rise to more and more phenomenon. And these dimensions of reality are where we live. This is further concretized through some of the teachings in the book. For example, the idea of I am. Everyone who's ever watched the Charlton Heston movie, I don't even remember what it's called. Is it called Exodus, or the Ten Commandments? Knows the story of the burning bush and the great I am. Moses goes up on the mountain and asks, who are you, to the burning bush, and the answer is I am, right? And kind of a riddle of a name, but Codex Oera Linda does a great job of explaining exactly what that means. So I'll read out another section here. Regarding our physical dimension, we are thus part of Wralda's infinite being, as is the physical dimension of all creation. Yet regarding our appearance, our characteristics, our mind, and all our thoughts, these do not belong to the being. All these are fleeting phenomena that appear through Wralda's life, which appear as they are through his wisdom and not otherwise. But because his life is perpetually progressing, nothing can remain stationary. Therefore, all creatures change in their position, their appearance, as well as their minds. Therefore, neither earth herself nor any creature may ever say, I am, but rather, I was. So this is a more clear explanation of what I am means. It means that the Creator remains constant, whereas all the creations are in perpetual state of change. And they go on to say, we can refer to ourselves in the past tense, but to say I am is pretentious as well as false, because as soon as you say I am, you no longer are what you just said. And I think you can understand where they're coming from here, and that is all summed up in this simple I am, which can be found in in the Abrahamic religions as well. Speaking of syncretism, you also can't speak of Codex Oera Linda without looking at the elephant in the room, that there's a character in the book called Jesus, very close to Jesus. And in Codex Oera Linda, Jesus comes from the Kashmir region, and is a teacher of men, and is eventually the priests and princes take the story of Jesus and deify him, as happens so often in Codex Oera Linda, a deification of characters like Minerva, Jesus. The interesting thing about the Jesus character in Codex Oera Linda, one interesting thing, is that he's referred to in the book by several different names, all of which are we're covering many of the major religions of the world. So he was befriended by a Freya who had been taken into slavery in that part of the world. And this Freya called him Buddha. And Buddha would mean a bag, so a pouch, a purse, something you keep money in, something you carry valuables in, because he kept a treasure of wisdom in his heart, and a treasure of wisdom in his mind, and a treasure of love in his heart. But he's also said to be called by the priests, the jealous priests and princes called him Fo. And interestingly, Fo is the Chinese, at least the first syllable of the Chinese name for the Buddha, Fo Tuo. And then an even more interesting aspect of that is that there's this laughing Buddha character, as he's called many times, who is not a representation of Fo, the Buddha that we know from the original Buddha, but the laughing Buddha, Budai. And budai in Chinese means a bag, so a purse, something you carry valuables in. Budai was said to be a poor but happy monk, and is named after a bag, just like Buddha in Frayas. And then the other name that he was given by the people was Krisen, and Krisen obviously sounds a lot both like Krishna as well as Christ. So pretty much every religion of the era is covered by this one character in Codex Oera Linda. I think that's probably why one of the reasons that the book is considered a forgery, because that's just too convenient, I guess. But you have to put in some effort to learn the language and read Codex Oera Linda to understand that the probability of it being a forgery by one or a handful of people in a short period of time is just, in my opinion, very low, because it encompasses so much of history, geography, religion, linguistics. These people would have had to, they didn't have access to the internet. How did they come up with all of this? So that's just something about the syncretism of God. Buddha, Jesus in Codex Oera Linda is deified. So he's not considered God, but obviously the Christians consider him God, or at least some sects of Christianity do. So I couldn't talk about God without at least mentioning that part of the story. And then the last thing that I'd like to speak to is the role of people in the creation. So there's several resources in Codex Oera Linda to understand. Once you've understood who God is and how creation works, the mechanics of it, there's several sections that explain to you your role in this creation. That includes the laws. So there's many laws included in Codex Oera Linda governing everything from the way markets work to the way civil society works to the division of labor and wealth. And there's one particular section about, we call it's section 13G, we call it the unsociable man, where someone comes to complain to one of the Burkmaids that his house has been washed away by a storm. And he's basically angry at Wralda for letting this happen to him. The maid's name is Trost, and that has a significance too, linguistically, which I won't get into, but perhaps some of my German and Dutch listeners will understand the significance of the name Trost in a story where a man comes asking for sympathy, basically, and is refused because he basically, she tells him it's God helps those who help themselves, or God helps those who help others. It's your own fault for the way you act, and your cause and effect. And it's a very eye-opening section that, together with the laws and the more mythical aspects of Codex Oera Linda, really teaches you something about how those people would have thought, and it's just a valuable lesson for anybody in any time or place. I'm going to read the very last section of the Primal Teachings, Book 2, which sums up the Freya's conception of God, creation, and man's role in creation. We, Freya's children, are emergences through Wralda's life, in the beginning mean and bare, but always becoming and advancing towards perfection, without ever becoming as good as Wralda himself. Our mind is not Wralda's spirit, it is merely a semblance of it. When Wralda created us, he lent us through his wisdom a brain, senses, memory, and many good qualities. By means of these we can consider his creations and his primordial Eva. From these we can learn, and about them we can speak, all and only for our own benefit. If Wralda had not given us any senses, we would perceive and know nothing, and we would be yet more helpless than a jellyfish that is driven forth by the ebb and flow. This could be just as easily be a Buddhist text. Perhaps it could be a biblical text. To me, it gives hope that we live in an eternal good. The creation in its many dimensions is simply an emergence out of a central oneness that is wholly good. And at some point, that tiny bit of creation that we are as individuals will return to this whole eternal oneness and goodness. And that gives me hope. Thanks for listening.